Today, I'm going to share with you about speaking your miracle into existence. And I've subtitled this, How to Get Fast Results in Your Life and Speak Your Next Level Result into Existence. I'm going to give you just a little bit of background to think about. And ask you this, are you struggling with a long-term challenge? So a relationship issue or dynamic, a business situation, maybe you have a life situation, your weight or your health or your mindset, any one of those situations that's been going on for 3 to 5 years or more. Maybe it's 20 years, maybe it's 30 years, maybe it's since you were a teenager. Maybe it's since you got married. Maybe it's since you started your business. Maybe it's 20 years long. It's been going on for a long time. And the truth of the matter is, in the natural, it's not likely to go away quickly. The thing is, the common prescription says that in order to fix something that's taken a long time to come into existence, it's going to take a long time to fix it, even if you go by the book. So it might be that it takes 3 to 5 years or more to be able to fix it. Your relationship should take 3 to 5 years to heal. Your new business should take 3 to 5 years before it's profitable. Your new business angle should take 3 to 5 years before it's rock solid. Your new health should take 3 to 5 years before you're out of danger. But what if it could happen quickly? So I'm going to teach into this in just a moment. I want to do two things first. First, I want to take this time to the Lord in prayer. And then I want to give you about 5, maybe 6 quick Bible examples of how this happens historically in the Bible and how it happens quickly before I teach into it. Father, I come before you right now, and I thank you for this opportunity to share with your people something that you have laid on my heart, even in the last 24 hours. Father, this is fresh in my heart. I haven't had years to prepare all of these notes. I do believe you've been pouring some ideas into me over the years, but the crux of what I'm giving these folks right now is something that you've literally given me within the last 24 hours. So I don't have a whole bunch of prepared notes, God, but what you are able to do is speak through me. And I ask that you'll do that. In the name of Christ, we pray thankfully. Amen. I want to give you 4, 5, 6 different examples. This first one, I read it right out of the word. This is Jesus, Matthew chapter 9, verses 1 through 8. And Jesus entered into a ship, and he passed over and came into his own city. And behold, they brought to him a man sick of the palsy. He was lying on a bed. And Jesus, seeing their faith, said unto the sick of the palsy, Son, be of good cheer. Thy sins are forgiven thee. And behold, before I go any further, let's talk about this. Sick of the palsy. The truth of the matter is, on average, he's been sick for a long time. Now, we don't hear here if he's been sick for 3 years or 20 years. But when you see somebody that's sick today with the palsy, how long have they probably been sick? 10, 15, 20 years. So Jesus is dealing with somebody who's probably been sick for a period of time. Verse 3 says, And behold, certain of the scribes said within themselves, This man blasphemeth. And Jesus, knowing their thoughts, said, Wherefore think ye evil in your hearts? For whether is easier to say, Thy sins be forgiven thee, or to say, Arise and walk? But that ye may know that the Son of Man hath power on earth to forgive sins. Then he said to the sick of the palsy, Arise, take up thy bed, and go into thy house. And he arose and departed to his house. Before I go any further, let's once again talk about this. Did it take 3 to 5 years? Did Jesus say, okay, here's what I want you to do. I want you to take this holy salve, and I want you to put it on your body, and I want you to take it for 3 years. I want you to take it for 5 years, and in 3 to 5 years, you'll be well, and you can give me the credit. No, he said, take up your bed and go to your house. And the man arose, and he immediately departed to his house, and he was healed. He was healed so quickly that when the multitude saw it, verse 8, they marveled and glorified God, which had given such power unto men. They saw that power, and they saw the instantaneous nature of it. There's a similar situation in John chapter 5. This is John chapter 5, verses 1 through 15. I'm going to skim through this, but this is the man that had been, verse 3 says, there was a great multitude of impotent folk, of blind, halt, withered. They were waiting for the moving of the water. And so basically, by the sheep market, there was a pool. The pool was called Bethesda. It had 5 porches. And basically the way that it worked was that an angel went down at a certain season into the pool, let's say once a year or once every 3 months, and it troubled the water. And whosoever first after that troubling, so the angel got there, if you stepped into the water, you got healed immediately. And so there was a man that was there, had been sick for 38 years, 38 years. He'd been sick. And so when Jesus saw him lying there, and Jesus knew that he'd been lying there for a really long time, he said unto him, will you be made whole? Like, do you want to become well? And it's interesting here that the man did not say, yes, I want to become well. The man indicated his situation. How about you? Do you have a situation that's 38 years old? And if Jesus came to you and he said, can I touch this and can I change it? Would you say, well, Lord Jesus, this is a big problem. It's been here for 38 years and it's troubling. Look, I've been there. I've personally, Sean Mize here, I have been there where the Lord has spoken into something and I'm like, God, this thing is really huge. Will you give me the steps to go through this? So the impotent man answered him and he said, sir, I don't have any man that when the water is troubled to put me into the pool. While I'm trying to roll into the pool, another person steps down and they get their miracle. So every single time I try to get to the pool, but every single time somebody beats me for 38 years, I haven't been able to get my healing. And so Jesus just said to him, rise, take up your bed and walk. And immediately the man was made whole immediately. It didn't, Jesus, once again, didn't say, okay, here's a bottle. Here's a bottle of chemo. Here's a bottle of something. And 3 to 5 years later, you'll be healed and you can give me credit. No, immediately the man was made whole and took up his bed and walked. And on the same day was the Sabbath. So that's story number 2. I want to give you story number 3. This is David and Goliath. Most of you probably know the story of David and Goliath. Basically, the Philistines were gathering against the Israelites. And basically they were, if we look back at the old history, the Philistines were constantly warring against Israel, just constantly warring. They were coming into their city, they were stealing things, they were setting their crops on fire. This wasn't something that happened overnight. This wasn't, they came in on their boats and they said, okay, we're going to come in and we're going to trouble Israel. This happened on a regular basis. Now, I want to skip a whole lot. I'll give you the verses if you want to study this. I think it's a great story to study. This is 1 Samuel 17, verses 1 through 54. I'm going to skip to verse 20, and I want to talk a little bit about David. David rose up early in the morning, and he left his sheep with a keeper. So, what is this imply? It implies that David was working. He was in the sheep yard and so he left the sheep with somebody that could take care of the sheep. So the sheep needed somebody to take care of them, and David was the sheep keeper. And he took and he went as his dad Jesse had commanded him. Okay, and he went to the war as the host was going forth to fight, and shouted for the battle, because Israel and the Philistines had put the battle in array, army for army. Okay, so these armies have been fighting each other for a long period of time. There's a verse, and if I come across it, I'll give it to you again. It's in those 54 verses that they had been doing this particular battle for 40 days. So 40 days, every day they wake up in the morning, the Philistines call out, we're gonna come kill you, and the Israelites say, okay, well, we're gonna fight against you. And basically what they had was they had this real big tall guy, this big giant. And because it was a big giant, everybody was scared of him. And he would call out and he would call out and he would say, is there anybody here that's willing to come over here and fight me? And if you can fight me, then hey, you win. And of course, the Israelites, nobody wanted to fight a 9-foot giant. Nobody wanted to fight. And so for 40 days, this battle's going on and on. But remember, this 40-day battle is in the midst of year after year after year of war and fighting, et cetera, et cetera. But even so, it's 40 years. And so David is a sheep, he's a shepherd, and he comes on this situation and he goes, who is this uncircumcised Philistine that is challenging the army, right? And David says to the king, he says, look, your servant kept his father's sheep, and a lion came and a bear came and took a lamb out of the flock. And I went after him and I smote him and delivered it out of his mouth. And when he rose against me, I caught him by his beard and I smote him and I slew him. Thy servant slew both the lion and the bear, and this uncircumcised Philistine shall be as one of them, seeing he hath defied the armies of the living God. Now, there's some more discussion. I want to move through here, though. And if we move to verse 44, the Philistine Goliath, the big guy, says to David, come to me, and I will give your flesh unto the fowls of the air and to the beasts of the field. Then said David to the Philistine Goliath, thou comest to me with a sword, and you come with a spear, and you come with a shield, but I come to you in the name of the Lord of hosts, the God of the armies of Israel, whom thou hast defied. This day, not 40 days, not 3 to 5 years, this day will the Lord deliver thee, Goliath, into my hand. This day, he spoke that into existence. He said, just like Jesus spoke healing for the paralytic, just like Jesus spoke healing for the man laying by the pool of Bethesda, he spoke this into existence. He said, this day, full confidence, the Lord will deliver you into my hand, and I will smite thee, and I will take your head from you, and I will give the carcasses of the host of the Philistine this day unto the fowls of the air and to the wild beasts of the earth, that all the earth may know that there is a God in Israel. And all this assembly around me shall know that the Lord saves not with spear and sword, but the battle is the Lord's, and he will give you into our hands. And it came to pass, when the Philistine arose and came and he drew near to meet David, that David hastened and he ran toward the army to meet the Philistines. So all these other army men that were trained and they had swords, they were fleeing, they were scared. But David runs. And as David is running, he puts his hand in his bag. Okay, so he carries a bag, and the bag has stones in it. Okay, why did the bag has stones in it? Here's the thing. David didn't pick up the bag today and put stones in it. David has probably had a bag with stones in it for 10 years or 15 years or 20 years, because when a lion or a bear comes against the sheep, he doesn't have to run down to the creek to go find some stones. He already has them in his bag. Okay. We might talk about this later. We'll probably talk about this later, but there's a preparation component with David for being able to have a one-day success. Jesus had a preparation component to be able to have an instantaneous success healing those people, but we'll come back to that. So David put his hand in his bag and he took from the bag a stone, and he slang it. And he slang it, he put it in his sling. Was this the first time that he had put a stone in a sling? No. And he smote the Philistine in his forehead, that the stone sunk into his forehead, and he fell upon his face to the earth. And so David prevailed over the Philistine with a sling and a stone, and he smote the Philistine, and he slew him, because there was no sword in the hand of David. David did it with a stone. So David ran and he stood upon the Philistine Goliath, and he took his sword. Then he took his sword and he drew it out of the sheath, and he finished killing him, and he cut off his head. And we're going to stop right there. That was the third miracle I wanted to share with you. Okay, this next passage, Lord gave this to me 3 or 4 years ago. I don't want to say I meditate on this passage every single morning, but it is a serious part of my preparation for the war that I perform in my business over the course of the last few years. This is just part of my preparation. Second Chronicles chapter 20, verses 1 through 13, 1 through 30. I'm not gonna read the entire passage. I think it's a great passage to study. I've taught on it before on these faith-based calls. The bottom line is, Jehoshaphat was king of Judah, and he was told, probably by the lookouts, that there comes a great multitude against you from beyond the sea on this side Syria, and they're in Hazazon Tamar, which is En Gedi. So long story short, I'll summarize like the next 10, 15 verses. They're coming. It's like 500,000 men. And Jehoshaphat is scared. All the people are scared. They come together, they pray, they fast, and they're preparing. Okay, they're preparing their hearts to be able to go out and have war. And they may have been preparing for thinking that it was going to be a 90 to 180-day war. And now I'm going to skip over to verse 14. Okay, so they've prayed, they fasted. For the sake of time, I've skipped those verses. Verse 14, so this is Second Chronicles chapter 20, verse 14. And then upon Jehaziel, the son of Zechariah, the son of Benaiah, the son of Jael, the son of Mattaniah, a Levite of the sons of Asaph, came the Spirit of the Lord in the midst of the congregation. So the Spirit of the Lord came onto this person, and the Spirit said that through him, hearken ye, all Judah, and ye inhabitants of Jerusalem, and thou, King Jehoshaphat, thus says the Lord unto you, be not afraid nor dismayed by reason of this great multitude, for the battle is not yours, but God's. Now, that's another clue to how we fight the battles. And I'm laying all of these passages out because I want to be able to speak some things to you in just a few minutes and have the history in place that you'll be able to go back and look at it, maybe not refer to every single piece of this as we go through. Verse 16 says, tomorrow, not next year, not the next 90 to 180 days, but tomorrow go ye down against them, and behold, they come up by the cliff of Ziz, and you shall find them at the end of the brook, before the wilderness of Jeruel. You shall not need to fight in this battle. Set yourselves, stand ye still, and see the salvation of the Lord with you, O Judah and Jerusalem. Fear not, nor be dismayed. Tomorrow go out against them, for the Lord will be with you. Now, Jehoshaphat's response as king of Judah is that he bowed his head with his face to the ground, and all Judah and the inhabitants of Jerusalem, they fell before the Lord, worshiping the Lord. They're looking at a 90 to 180 day battle, perhaps. It's been transformed. The Lord says, look, I'm going to fight it for you. Okay. So in verse 20, it says, they rose early in the morning and they went forth into the wilderness. Verse 21, and when he had consulted with the people, he appointed singers unto the Lord that they should praise the beauty of holiness as they went out before the army, and to say, praise the Lord, for his mercy endureth forever. And when they began to sing and to praise, the Lord set ambushments against the children of Ammon, Moab, and Mount Seir, who were coming against him, and they were smitten. Because the children of Ammon and Moab stood against the inhabitants of Mount Seir, utterly to slay and destroy them. But what happened is they came against each other. They started having an internal fight, and they just killed off each other. And so when Judah came out there, they went to the watchtower in the wilderness. They looked at their enemy, and they discovered there were dead bodies fallen to the earth, and nobody escaped. They killed off all of them. All of the fighting warriors that were supposed to come against Judah got into a fight against themselves. Maybe they were like, who wanted to, cast the first stone? Who knows? They ended up fighting against themselves. Verse 25, when Jehoshaphat and his people came to take away the spoil of them, they found among them in abundance both riches with the dead bodies and precious jewels, which they stripped off for themselves, more than they could carry away. And they were 3 days in gathering the spoil. It was so much. So not only was this battle changed from something that could have been 90 to 180 days that could have killed off 200,000, 300,000 men. And instead, in one day, the battle was over. And then it took 3 days to collect all the jewels and all the armor and all the gold and all the silver and all the brass off of the 500,000 men that had fallen. And I believe it was 500,000. It's in the passage that had fallen off of those men. And then on the 4th day, they assembled themselves in the valley of Baraka. There they blessed the Lord. Okay, I think that's story number 4. I'm going to give you, oh my goodness, I feel like skipping this one, but I'm going to give it to you. This is 1 Kings chapter 20. This is First Kings chapter 20. This is Ben-Hadad, the king of Syria, coming against Samaria and sent messages to Ahab, king of Israel. And there's quite a story here. And they come against Israel, and they begin to fight against Israel. And I'm going to skip now to verse 20. But before we get to verse 20, what happened was that Ben-Hadad and the kings became so proud of what they were getting ready to do against Israel that the night before the battle, all of the kings, they went to a tent and they started drinking, and they ended up getting drunk. They were so excited about the battle the next day that they got in there. They just thought they were just going to be able to slay everybody. And so what happened was the Israelites were able to come in and just kill off the drunken men, the drunken warriors, and run them off. And the Bible says, verse 20, they slew every one his man. The Syrians fled. Israel pursued them. Ben-Hadad, the king of Syria, escaped on a horse with the horsemen. And the king of Israel went out, he smote all the horses and chariot and slew the Syrians with a great slaughter. This happened apparently in one day. This should have been a big battle. It happened in one day. But this next verse is what's really interesting to me. The prophet came to the king of Israel, and he said unto him, Go, strengthen yourself and mark. See what thou doest, for at the return of the year, the king of Syria will come against you again. There's basically saying, look, you won this battle, but it's going to happen again. So sure enough, verse 26, and again, we're in 1 Kings chapter 20, verse 26, came to pass at the return of the year that Ben-Hadad numbered the Syrians and went up to Aphek to fight against Israel. Once again, the children of Israel were numbered. They were all present. They went against them. Verse 28, there came a man of God and spake unto the king of Israel and said, Thus says the Lord. I skipped this. The Syrians were being proud again. Okay. The Syrians were saying, look, the Lord, their Lord is God of the hills, but he's not God of the valleys. Therefore, will I deliver all this great multitude in thy hand, and you shall know that I am the Lord. So that that's what the Lord said. And so the Lord says, look, because they are proud, I'm going to deliver this whole great multitude into your hand. And so they pitched one over another for the next 7 days. So again, this was 7 days. And at the end of the seventh day, or in the seventh day, the battle was joined. And in 1 day, not 90 days, not 180 days, the children of Israel slew of the Syrians 100,000 footmen in 1 day. And the rest of the people that weren't slew, they fled to Aphek into the city. And when they got to the city, a wall of the city fell upon 27,000 of the men that were left. And Ben-Hadad fled and came into the city into an inner chamber. I'm not going to go on and on with the details. It's fascinating if you want to read it. Same thing with Job. You've heard the story. I'm not going to read it. It's Job chapter 42. The enemy came against Job, lost everything. He was sick. Theologians say it was a few months, nine months. Feels like to me it was a longer period of time. The bottom line is when God decided that this was over, he basically said to Job, look, make a sacrifice, pray for your friends, and everything will be restored to you. Verse 12, Job 42:12, the Lord blessed the latter end of Job more than his beginning. For he had 14,000 sheep, 6,000 camels, and 1,000 yoke of oxen, and 1,000 she-asses. And he also had 7 sons and 3 daughters. Now, I don't know if you add up the value of 14,000 sheep and 6,000 camels, and 1,000 yoke of oxen. I'm guessing that's 1,000 pairs. So 2,000 oxen in today's. I mean, what does a cow go for today? $1,000 to $2,000. They're just 1,000 a piece. I think they go for more than this today. But if they're only 1,000 a piece, 2,000 oxen would be $2 million today. This man was a millionaire, and he was basically a millionaire with a decision from God overnight. Genesis 26, 1 through 14. This is Isaac. There was a famine in the land. And in verse 12, it says, Isaac sowed in that land and received in the same year. Now, this is the same year. This violates what we've not violates, but this differs from what we just talked about. Instead of a day, it happened in a year. Now, the truth of the matter is a crop takes 82 days or 90 days to happen. So it says it was received in the same year. My guess is it was in a quarter. It was 90 days or maybe 2 crops, 180 days. It says he received in the same year 100-fold, and the Lord blessed him. Now, what's really interesting to me, I've taught on this before, verses 13 and 14. And man, Isaac waxed great and went forward and grew until he became very great. Now, what I believe that verse means, he didn't become very great in his first season of 100-fold. The 100-fold became the foundation. And like in the next 5 or 10 years, he took that 100-fold and then maybe had 30-fold next year and 50-fold next year and maybe a dead year and then 30-fold and maybe another 100-fold year. And when it was all done, he was probably a multi-millionaire, and God in a season had transformed his life. Verse 14 says, he had possession of flocks and possession of herds and great store of servants, and the Philistines envied him. So once again, the Philistines we talked about earlier, this is prior to David, they envied him because of all this. And if you keep reading the story, you'll see that they would do nasty things to Isaac and his team. And I think they ended up taking off. So here's the thing. There's hundreds of situations in the Bible just like this. The 5, or I think I gave you 7. Those are simply the 7 I was going to say that came to my mind. Let's say the Lord placed those in my mind this morning. I believe there's hundreds of situations in the Bible just like those. I chose 5 or 6 or 7 to build your faith that what I'm getting ready to tell you is biblical. I gave you the biblical underpinning. If we had 3 days, I could probably show you another 100. But I want you to have that biblical underpinning, because what I'm getting ready to talk about, I don't intend to just keep giving you verse by verse by verse. This is where it comes from. This is where it comes from. This is where it comes from. I just gave you some examples, and there's many more in the Word. But I want you to see, I want you to have faith that this kind of thing has happened in the Word. It happens again and again and again. I want you to speak into something. So here's the thing. If there's hundreds of situations and I just chose 7, here's a question for you. If that happened for all of them, why not us? Did God stop doing miracles in modern time? Like, did God change? Like, is God impotent? Is God no longer the God of the Israelites? Is God no longer the God of the Corinthians? Is God no longer the God of the Ephesians and the Philippians? Like, has God changed? Well, my understanding of the word is that we get to step into it, and we get to literally step in, and we get every single promise that's in the word. If we're following, so if we're following the new covenant, if we're following Jesus, that we have access to every single promise that's in the word. So if that happened for all of them and you follow Jesus, why not you? Is God's way necessarily to take 3 to 5 years? No matter how messed up your relationship, does it really need 3 to 5 years of study and counseling and hard work? Does your business really need to take 3 to 5 years to turn around? Does your health really need to take 3 to 5 years to turn around? Okay. That does it. So the natural might tell us that that's what it's going to take, because every business book you read might say it takes 3 to 5 years to make this happen. Every relationship book that you read might say it takes 3 to 5 years of daily hard work to fix this. Your health, I mean, your health, it's going to take 3 to 5 years, and taking this potion for 3 to 5 years for you to finally be well. And maybe in the natural, all of those things are true. But what if God simply changed you in a heartbeat? What if he changed your relationship? What if he changed your war? What if he changed your business? What if he changed your health? So if that's the case, what does it take to make that happen then? Okay, so if we're thinking about something instantaneously, what what does that take? And I want to dig into something here. Does it take just thinking, just listening to Sean talk about this for 27 minutes, and then you get filled with faith and you go, okay, well, I'm going to go try speaking this into existence. I'm going to do a quick 5-minute prayer, and it's probably not going to work. And then Sean's wrong, the Bible's wrong, Jesus is wrong, right? Because it's just thinking in a 5-minute prayer. Because it's easy to look at David and say, well, all David did was pull out a stone and swing it. What we don't see is that David probably had slung that stone 1,000 times, 10,000 times in his 10 years, 15 years, 20 years, 25 years. Not only did he sling the stone to kill things, he had remember when you were a kid and you were practicing throwing and you threw the football 1,000 times? What do you think David did? You think David went out to a tree in the wilderness and he said, you know what, I'm going to hit that knot on that tree? And how many times do you think in one afternoon David slung that rock to try to hit the bullseye? And when he hit the knot on the tree, he would go, yes. And he would try it again and again and again. He might have slung that stone 30,000 times so that he could have that 5-minute victory. Think about that. Did Jesus just do 5-minute prayers, or he was 30 years when he went into ministry, and the Bible tells us that when he was 12 years old, he was in the temple studying and learning. What did Jesus do between ages 12 and 30? I personally believe that he worked. I believe he worked. I believe he paid his way in the natural. But you know what I think he did for 2 to 4 hours a day, or maybe more, probably more? He spent time with God, even though he was God physically, the Bible indicates that he was born as a baby. He had to grow up. It indicates that he went to the temple to study. Now, why on earth, if Jesus as God already had the entire Bible memorized in his head because he was God in that way, why would he have had to go to the temple? Okay, so I think that even though we can split hairs on this, but in some way, shape, or form, even though he was God, he was given the limitations of the human body. He was given the limitations of the human body. My goodness, if he wasn't given the limitations of the human body, then what good would it have been to say, oh, he never sinned? Right? Like if he didn't have the capacity to sin because he was completely God, how could he ever truly be sacrificed as the lamb and pay for it? But maybe I'm speaking out of turn theologically. Okay, maybe you could take a sinless angel and put him on the sacrificial official place, and he could have done the trick. But the truth of the matter is, if that's the truth, why didn't God just choose an angel? He had to choose a human that was I believe Jesus was capable of sinning and yet never did. And so Jesus had to learn. And so not only was he learning during those 18 years, I believe he was spending 2 to 4 hours a day with God or more in order that he could touch somebody and they could be healed. So when Jesus was born, he wasn't touching people and healing them. When he was 12 years old with no study, and he'd probably been studying prior to that, he wasn't just touching people and they were healed. And if he was, he'd have spent time with God. Does that make sense? Okay. Look at Job. Look at Job. We didn't read all of 42. I mean, my goodness, I spent a whole lot more time on the word today than I wanted to. I didn't want to spend 25 minutes and bore you with the word. And so I skipped that part. But if you look at Job's relationship, he prayed 2 or 3 times a day. I think he made a sacrifice every day. If not every day, he made a weekly sacrifice of some of his animals to atone for his son's sins. Like Job was deeply spiritual. He was deeply religious. He had an incredible relationship with God. Not only did he have a deep, incredible relationship with God, he had one so much so that the enemy, Satan, went to God and said, the only reason that Job likes you and has this deep relationship is because you've blessed him. Okay. And so Job had a deep, deep relationship. And then during the 9 months to multiple years that Job went through his travail, and he was talking with his friends and he was talking with God, I believe he had a deep relationship with God. He was struggling through that. And so when God touched him in a heartbeat, and of course, God can do anything in a heartbeat, and this is God doing his thing. But here's the thing, Job had a deep relationship before that instantaneous miracle happened. And who knows? You say, Sean, you're twisting things a little bit. Okay, fine. Throw this one out. Okay, this was all God. But I hope that you understand my heart, because I'm getting ready to transition into something that your miracles can happen in an instant, but you and me have to be prepared spiritually. So here's the question. What if you want miracles quick? You don't want to take 3 to 5 years to heal the relationship. You don't want to take 3 to 5 years to turn the business around. You don't want to take 3 to 5 years to get your health in place. But you're not capable yet of doing what Jesus did and touching a palsied person or telling a palsied person to get up and walk and they become healed. What if you and me, but I'm talking to you right now because God spoke this already to me, and now I'm passing it on. And I want you to get a picture of that. This just came into my head. How about you? The Lord says in the Bible that we should have rivers of living water flowing out of our belly. And my picture for me is that God pours himself and his ideas into me, and then they flow out of me to you. Shouldn't they be doing the same thing to you? Like you shouldn't be going to church on Sunday and holding it in. You shouldn't be coming to this message and then holding it in. You should be going to church on you should be going to church on Sunday. You should be coming here. You should be going wherever else that you are, and you should be getting poured into, and then you should be flowing it out to different people. And so that's what I'm doing right now. I'm flowing this out to you. What if you have to become a different person in order to have these kinds of one-day miracles? Let me say that again. What if you have to become a different person in order to have these kinds of miracles? What if you have to become a different person? When I say a different person, I mean like transformationally different. Like a Romans 12:1, transformationally different person, completely transformationally different. I meant to have that verse queued up and I don't. So I'm actually going to look it up real quick. Romans chapter 1, uh, Romans chapter 12, Romans chapter 12, verse 1. And I'm going to read from the NIV. I usually use King James. I urge you, brothers and sisters, in view of God's mercy, to offer your bodies as a living sacrifice, holy and pleasing to God. This is your true and proper worship. It's actually verse 2. Do not conform to the pattern of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. Then you will be able to test and approve what God's will is, his good, pleasing, and perfect will. I think that this verse is so critical to us doing deep things. Now, I know this verse just says, then you'll be able to test and approve what God's will is. But how many times have you said, God, please tell me your will? And you spend like the next 90 to 80 days studying and praying and studying and praying to know what God's will is, or any other thing. But what if it's as simple as taking the 90 to 180 days or 5 years to transform the renewing of your mind so that you're able to test and approve God's will quickly, so that you're able to touch the palsy, so that you're able to touch your relationship, so that you're able to touch your business? Here's the thing. I gave you all the stories, so I'm not going to reread them. David became the person that could take Goliath out. David didn't just pop onto the scene. David had been throwing a rock in a sling 10,000, 20,000, maybe even 100,000 times in his childhood, just like boys today throw footballs 100,000 times. All right. Just like boys 100 years ago might have pulled spears 100,000 times. And just like, women, 100 years ago might have played with a doll and practiced having children for 100,000 times, feeding the baby. That's what children have done. David became the person that could take Goliath out. David didn't just wake up one morning and see it and go, you know what, I don't know how to use a spear. So, I wonder what would happen if I took a rock out of the river and put it into a slingshot and just a wing and a prayer. Hey, God, you know what? I'm going to throw this rock and, God, will you please? No, David practiced. Are we going to God completely unprepared and saying, God, will you do a miracle when we haven't done the work? Jesus became the person who could do miracles. Jesus wasn't born the person that could do miracles. Yes, Jesus was born fully God and fully man, but the man part had to grow into somebody that could reach his hand out. I just popped into my head. Remember the time that Jesus went to heal this guy that was blind. I remember, if I remember correctly, he reached down into the ground and he pulled up some dirt and he spit on it and he put it on the guy's eye and he said, "Hey, how does that look?" And the guy says, "Well, I can see better than I used to, but men look like trees." And so Jesus is like, "Okay, well, let me do this again." Right? Even Jesus did a miracle that didn't quite take. Right? Jesus even did a miracle that didn't quite take, and I'm sure you could put different spins on that. But here's the thing: Jesus became the person who could do miracles. Isaac became the person that could get 100-fold return. Did Isaac? Do you believe that Isaac went into a 40-acre plot and like threw a handful of seeds out, and then went to God and laid on his couch every day and said, "God, please bless the field. God, please bless the field." I don't believe that. I personally believe that Isaac probably went into town and probably went into the enemy's town and went around and found homeless or out of work Philistines and said, "Look, if you will come work my field for free right now, I will put you on commission and I will give you a percentage of the field." That's my personal belief. I believe he went out and rounded up maybe 100 lads out of the Philistines, and I don't believe he paid him. Why? Because I'm guessing he was probably mostly broke. So he went in there and he had this field and he said, "I'm going to hire these Philistines and they're going to sow the field and they're going to put the field in. They're going to water it. They're going to do the wells. They're going to do all of this." And at the end of the season, he had 100-fold return and he paid everybody. And who knows, the 100-fold return might have been after he paid everybody. Isaac became the person that had 100-fold return. And then once he had that 100-fold return, he became the person that got rich. And remember, I'm going to go back. This is the one time I'm going to go back. Maybe I'll go back a couple times, but verse 13. So this is Genesis 26, verse 13 says, And the man waxed great and went forward and grew until he became very great. He didn't just miraculously fall into being great, he grew. How do we grow? We grow through hard work. I hope you're getting something out of this, because I'm trying to explain to you in natural words what God has put into me in the last 24 hours. God has literally transformed my mind in the last 24 hours. Now, I've spent 30 something 40 years reading the word, 30 something years studying the word, 30 something years praying and growing and growing and growing. And I have done the work. Like, I'm not bragging, but just like David did the work by throwing the stone 30,000, 40,000, 50,000 times. I've read the Bible, I've read the verses, I've taught the thing. But you know what? Within the last 24 hours, God revealed to me something transformational. He's actually been digging like a new trench for me in the last 2 weeks. Last 2 weeks, actually, the last couple of months, he started doing something. And about 2 weeks ago, he gave me something. And then, literally, in the last 24 hours, the culmination of these last couple of months into these last 24 hours, I want to say, and this probably isn't like fully accurate, I want to say that in the last 2 months and a significant part in the last 24 hours, I have grown as much in 24 hours as I have in the last 30 years in my relationship. But it didn't happen out of nowhere. It came out of throwing the sling 30,000 times so that I was prepared with deep prayer and deep study over the last 2 months. Again, I'm not giving any credit to myself, but I'm saying I have done the work and I have laid the groundwork for the Lord in 24 hours. And it wasn't even 24 hours, it's less than 24 hours since. But the realization happened like 18 hours ago. And within like an hour, or two or three after the realization, the change began to happen. And I don't believe that it's over. I don't believe that it's over. Would it be worth whatever the price was to pay to throw the stone 30,000 times? Would it be worth spending time with God the way that Jesus did? Would it be worth learning how to plow the field and hire 100 Philistines? Would it be worth becoming that new person if you could have the result that you want? And then, if it's, let me repeat that. I want that to sink in, not because I'm preaching to you. Actually, I'm preaching to you, but not because I'm preaching down, not because I'm preaching at. I'm preaching with. God preached this to me, and like rivers living water, I believe I have a responsibility to pass it on. The Bible tells us that every one of us has a responsibility to pass it on. It tells us in a roundabout way in Proverbs that our responsibility when we get old and gray and bald is to be able to pass on to the next generation. Jesus said, "Go ye into all the world and make disciples of all men." What does that mean? You become a disciple. It's your responsibility to go out there. Paul went out there. It is our responsibility. And the truth of the matter is, the greater God pours into us, I believe, the greater our responsibility is. Okay. And so if it's true that within the last 24 hours, I have doubled my capacity for God over 30 years, and maybe that's an exaggeration. Maybe that's just, what do they call it when you know, but whatever that, who knows what that number is. But the truth of the matter is, even if I'm 10% closer to who God wants me to be, does that not mean that I have a 10% greater responsibility? I do. And so I'm pouring this into you. And I hope that in 7 days, whatever you're getting out of this, you may not get the same thing God gave me in the last 24 hours, but whatever it is that you're getting right now, I hope that in the next 7 days, you will turn it around and pour it into somebody else, because that's how God's kingdom works. The more that we pour into other people, the more God can continue to pour into us. The thought comes to me is the talents, right? There's verses in the Bible that says if God can trust you with a little, he'll give you more. And a lot of times we think about money and talents. If God gives you $10 and you do good with it, he'll give you 100 and 1,000 and 1,000,000, right? Sometimes it's talents. How about this right here? If God pours something into you, and let's just say God is pouring into you right now through me. I'm the mouthpiece, but God is pouring in through me. If you receive this and then you're like a dam, like a river dam that's broken up, a beaver dams it all up in you and you never share it, is God going to keep pouring more into you if you just never share it? Or if you start pushing it out like I'm doing right now, I make myself, by pouring this out to you, I make myself more available to God to give me more. I'm fully expecting God to give me more in the next few days. But if I held this close inside of myself, he might not. Does that make sense? So let me ask you again, would it be worth it to fight if you could have the result you want? And if it's worth it, are you willing to fight for it? I want you to think about this. A swimmer, this four-year-old swimmer says, you know what? Yeah. I want to take 4 hours a day of training for 20 years to go to the Olympics. That's what I want. How many young kids say that? And they put it on their wall. And how many actually do it for 20 years? Some of them quit after a week. Some of them quit after a month. Some of them quit after a year. But who goes all the way to the Olympics? It's the ones that do it for 20 years or for 15 years. Is the swimmer willing? Is the swimmer willing to swim for 4 hours a day or whatever it takes to get on the podium? Is he willing? Was David willing to become the person? Was the paralytic willing to take up his bed and walk? Here's the thing. If Jesus had said to the man, take up your bed and walk, and the man had laid there and not walked, would the man have become healed? No, he would not have. I truly believe Jesus would have gone to somebody else. Was Peter, we didn't do this story, but you know it. Was Peter willing to walk on the water? What if Jesus had said, come on, Peter, come walk to me? We make such a big deal about Peter not having any faith, right? We're always getting on Peter for not having faith and for denying Jesus and all of this stuff. But the truth of the matter is, Peter actually walked on the water for 2 or 3 steps or whatever it was, right? How many of us, we don't even walk on the water so we can't fall? Was Peter willing to walk on the water? Here's the thing. I truly believe this. God's not going to decide for you. I wrote in my notes, God can't decide for you, but God actually can decide for you. But if he decided for you, he would become a dictator, not a loving God. And God's not a dictator. Now, he has rules, and those rules say that, look, if we don't either follow all the rules or accept Christ, we don't get into his heaven. Hey, it's his kingdom. It's just like my house. You don't come into my house. We have certain rules. My wife doesn't want you wearing shoes in the house, so you don't come in the house if you don't take your shoes off, generally speaking. Okay? Sometimes she breaks the rules, just like God. He can break the rules if he wants to, right? So in theory, God could decide for you, but he's not going to. Jesus didn't decide for the paralytic that the paralytic would actually walk. The paralytic had to take up his own mat and walk. So here's the question. This is the question. This is the crux of today. Now, I'm not done yet, so don't go anywhere because you hear the crux, because I'm gonna speak into you what I believe needs to happen for it to happen. Right? That's the next phase in today's training. But are you willing? Are you willing to become the person? I think that so often we want the miracle without the transformation. We want God to heal us without. Here's what comes to mind, and I may be out of line when I say this. Can God heal a diabetic? And I get that some diabetes comes like just naturally, like you're totally normal and you don't do anything bad and you just get it. I get that. But my understanding is that most of the time diabetes comes because we eat too much sugar, right? I mean, I eat too much sugar, and when I do, I'm like, oh, that doesn't feel good. Okay. So let's just say we have a diabetic who got diabetic from eating too much sugar for 20 years. Can God heal a guy? Yeah, God absolutely can. But here's the thought question for you. If God heals the diabetic, completely healed, but for the next year, the diabetic eats as much sugar as he possibly can just to test the healing. Was the healing secure? Absolutely. But does it mean that the disease won't come back if you feed, like imagine if you got bit by a snake and you went to the hospital and they gave you an anti-venom. So you're healed of the snake bite. But if you go back out and get bit by a snake again tomorrow, you're going to have a new snake bite. And the anti-venom from yesterday isn't going to prevent you. So remember, and I can't remember which case this is, but I think it was one of the paralytics. And it was also one of the women, right? Jesus healed them. And then he said, go out and sin no more, right? He didn't say, okay, you're healed, now go do whatever you want. He said, go, you're healed, now go be changed. So if God healed you today, if God did a miracle for you today, are you going to actually change? Or is God wasting his miracle? Are you willing to become the person? Because here's the thing, if you don't become the person, a 5-minute prayer isn't going to do the miracle. Now, I'm not saying that God sometimes doesn't respond to a 5-minute prayer and make a miracle happen, but that's not going to be consistent. But if you become the person and you're bathed in prayer, like Jesus was bathed in prayer, if you become the person and you've shot the sling of 30,000 times, then it's absolutely transformationally amazing what God can do through you in the next 5 years, the next 1 year, the next 10 years, the next 20 years, all the way until you die and go to heaven if that's where you're going. Okay. How do you become? So the question is, how do you become the person? Now we're really getting into the nitty gritty. How do you become the person? Do you study to become the person? I think that's a component. But the truth of the matter is, I've been studying the word for 30 something years, and I didn't become the person that God has made me into in the last less than 24 hours. Oh, and by the way, if I don't stay just like the paralytic, just like the diabetic, if I don't stay in what he's given me for the last 24 hours, what's going to happen? I'll go right back to who I was, right? Think about that. So is study sort of necessary? I think so. David studied the slingshot, but it wasn't everything. How about experience? How about experience? Does experience count? I think experience counts. David's experience counted, but he needed more. Okay. What about God? What do we really need? We really need God. Because here's the thing, when David threw the slingshot, when he threw the rock with a slingshot, he had practiced for 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, whatever it was, but he gave credit to God. So if it was all his own ability from hitting the slingshot 30,000 times, slinging the slingshot 30,000 times, would he have had a need to give credit to God? Now you could argue, well, he should give credit to God because God made him a smart man. God this. The truth of the matter is, I believe he gave credit to God because God did a miracle in the moment. But God did a miracle after the study. He did a miracle after the experience, and he did a miracle after the relationship with God. David didn't have to think, do I need to give God credit for this? No, David reflexively gave credit to God. Relationship with Christ. So much of what I just gave you is out of the Old Testament. Now, I'm a very firm believer that the Old Testament rules, the 500-600 rules, whatever they were, that those are Old Testament, that they're under the blood of the Lamb, that the only way that we can gain entrance to heaven, the only way that we can gain salvation is just by placing our faith in Jesus Christ. Okay. And if you're listening to me and you don't believe that, right? I just want to offer you one little thing. I don't want to try to convince you. I'm not here to proselyte. I'm not here to preach or anything like that along those lines. But here's the thing. It's kind of like if you live in Iran, then you would follow the supreme leader of Iran, and you would not be responsible for following the rules of the United States. But if you live in the United States and you're a citizen of the United States, then you would follow the rules and the loyalty of the United States. You wouldn't follow the rules and the loyalty of, say, Russia or China or Guatemala, right? It's the same thing. Like if you follow Buddha, then you would follow Buddha's rules. If you follow some other god, then you would follow those rules. And so if we're talking about the rules that come out of the relationship with Jesus Christ, then you just like, obviously I don't believe in Buddha, but if I follow Jesus and if I did, and if I were to do something that Buddha says that I'm supposed to do, I'm not going to get benefit from doing something that Buddha says because I follow Jesus. Does that make sense? I hope I'm not really messing things up here. I'm just kind of talking off the top of my head. But I truly believe this. I believe that the things that I'm talking about right now, they're empowered inside of you through Jesus Christ. And so if you don't follow completely in Jesus, then maybe 90% of what I'm talking about would be available to you, but it wouldn't all be available to you because some of what I'm talking about is relationship with Christ. Okay. So I'm going to peel my own skin back a little bit. I was just tempted to take this away. Here's the thing. In my own life, I remember back when I was I'm just going to go back 32 years in my life. And I've been saved for 40 years. I followed Jesus. I followed God. I've tried to do the right thing. And I'm not talking about just a religious sense, but do the right thing and my faith and Jesus and pray and read. There was always something that wasn't like 100%. And I think in the back of my mind, I knew it, but I didn't know what that was, right? I'd open the Bible up and study for another hour. I might go to another, I'd pray again. And the Lord has revealed some things to me very specifically in the last like 2 months. And then even deeper in the last week or two, and then even deeper in the last 24 hours. And he said, Sean, this is what you're missing. This is what you're missing. Like on some levels of your relationship with me, you've just been checking boxes. You've just been, and again, I don't want to take anything away from what I was doing. I don't want to take anything away from the faith-based calls. I don't want to take anything away from my faith. I don't want to take anything away from your faith. But just as in the last 24 hours, the Lord has allowed me to step into something spiritual that I believe, something in the neighborhood of like, and maybe because it's so fresh and because I feel it so much, like I'm feeling a doubling right now in my power with Christ. Like that's what I'm feeling right now. And it's not a diminution of the last 30 years, but it's a doubling. And I believe that kind of thing can happen for you. Now, maybe it's not a true doubling. How do you measure that? Maybe for you, it's not going to be a doubling. Maybe it's going to be a 20%ing, or maybe for you, it's going to be a tripling. I don't know. But something, and I've been working hard the last couple of months on something with the Lord. And again, the last couple of weeks, he's led me into something. But yesterday, something struck a chord inside of me. And I believe I was praying at the time. And if I didn't, I stepped in and I really started praying and I went deep and I was worshiping the Lord. And incidentally, I've spent, you remember I told you about Jehoshaphat, and then they went out and they praised, the singers praised the Lord before they went out onto the battlefield. And that's one of the things the Lord's been working on me lately, is praising and worshiping the Lord, not just praying, God, please bless my business. God, please bless my relationship, but literally worshiping and praising him for a half an hour or an hour, and then stepping into the situation. And so I stepped out and I took action today and yesterday. I took action, literally like 3 or 4, and I don't want to exaggerate because I was walking and it was divided, but I want to say 3 or 4 hours of deep prayer and then taking action and changing the words that I speak in the natural. So sometimes we have to change what we do in the natural. I could probably go through all those examples again. Jesus spoke, David spoke, David, you have to change. They went, David's situation, they went from being taunted by the Philistine to David coming onto the ground saying, look, we're not going to use swords here. We're just going to throw a slingshot. Sometimes we have to change our behavior. Within 24 hours, things have changed and radically changed in my situation in the last 24 hours. Things have already changed. This morning, I stood up, and against resistance, I became, with Christ's power, I became the leader in something that I should have been 18 years ago. 18 years ago, God gave me something 17 years ago where I have not fully been the leader in that thing. And there's another thing that the Lord gave me 17 or 18 years ago where I deviated. I wasn't the leader. And you know what? This morning there was resistance. But you know what? By God's grace, I just leaned into it and I said, you know what? I'm just going to do it. Whatever God does, whatever the result is, I'm just going to do it. If this is 90 days, if this is 180 days, and you know what? In my natural, I was thinking in my natural, you know what? That's how long it's going to take. And by the way, I want to go before today. The last few days, the Lord impressed on me to pray for something very, very specific. And I was just like, I don't remember the exact words, but I can only imagine me thinking, yeah, right, God, that's not going to work. Look, God, don't you get it? And again, please I didn't use these words, but this is the mentality that I probably had, right? God, do you get it? Do you realize how bad this thing is? You think me praying to you for half an hour is going to make a big difference? And please don't get me wrong. I didn't talk to the Lord like that. And maybe it wasn't quite that strong. And maybe I'm exaggerating a little bit. God forgive me. But I want you to understand that I didn't have a whole lot of belief, but you know what? A couple, 3 days ago, I leaned into it and I just started praying the thing he asked me to pray. And yesterday afternoon, something happened that was a miracle. Did I make that happen? No. Is there a 1 in 1,000% chance that it could have happened without the prayer? Yeah. And you know what? I actually believe in coincidences. I don't believe this was a coincidence. I believe that the Lord had me pray for something, and in 2 to 3 days, he did a miracle response, just like he did a miracle response for the paralytic. The Lord gave me something yesterday, and he said, I want you to speak something out. I want you to speak something out. And I wrestled with the Lord. I was like, God, are you sure about this? Are you this is going to be embarrassing? There's going to be resistance. There's going to be anger. And I stepped into it. I stepped into it. And for about 20 minutes, I spoke something out that I have never spoken before anybody else ever. I spoke it out for about 20 minutes and I had no idea what the response was. And you know what? There was an atmosphere of calm around a volatile situation for the first time in 6 months. In 20 minutes of doing what God gave me to do. And so today, again, I woke up and I walked into a volatile situation. And to be honest with you, I kind of had my guard down because yesterday there was a release. I don't know about you, but I'm the kind of person that if there's a release, I stay in the release. I generally don't fall back off. Okay. Like if I go here, I generally don't fall back off. But some people do this. And this situation, I was prepared for here and it fell off. And I think my initial response was like, I'm going to fight again. Within about 30, 45 seconds, I made that decision. You know what, Lord, I'm just going to step into this. And I did. And I became the leader that God probably called me to be 32 years ago. And I can even remember the moment now. I've been searching for it for 3 or 4 months, but a couple of days ago, I think he actually gave me the exact moment when I lost the full and deep abiding relationship that I'd had for 3, 4, 5 years. I can look back and I see 32, 33 years ago, I can see the exact moment. And he may shift it for me, but I think that's where it happened. And today, for about 20 minutes, maybe not even 20 minutes, I stepped into that. The craziest thing within 10, 15 minutes, there was a complete change in the resistance in the natural. We're talking about something natural, just like the Philistines, just like the paralysis, just like the Moabites coming against Jehoshaphat and whoever else came against them. There was a change in the atmosphere, so to speak, and a tangible change. And more than the atmosphere, a positive, multiple levels of positive response, a tangible, responsive change just 20 minutes later. Same thing. In my business, there's some things that I have been resisting in my business, something God gave me to do 5, 6 years ago, something else God gave me to do a year ago. And it's kind of like I tinker with it. And how many of you have ever done that? You know, maybe I just want some sympathy. How many of you have ever done that? Like he gives you something. How many of you have something God gave you in your business to do 5 years ago and you keep tinkering with it? You kind of start it. You start a podcast or you start a faith-based call or you start the first chapter in the book. But he told you to write a book, not a chapter, right? Like 5 years ago, he told you to write a book and you've written 3 chapters and you're like, I'm on the way. 5 years, I'm just making this up, but there's a couple of things I've been resisting. things that God told me to do. And this one specific thing, embarrassingly enough, he gave this thing to me to do a year or so ago. And this week, there's been some pressure in my life that I just gave in. I said, fine, I'm gonna do these things. It's not complete, but it's like probably 40% done in 3 days. And you know what? It was hard work, but it was so fulfilling. You know how I feel right now, the natural? I feel an incredible sense of accomplishment and freedom from just 3 days. And I call them days. It was probably 2 or 3 hours worth of work for 2 days and like 30 minutes of work for the third day to do something God gave me a year ago. That's embarrassing. I mean, I'm looking you in the eyes right now and telling you that's really embarrassing. But the crazy thing is that 36 hours later, I'm already seeing how that action is releasing other avenues in my business, like right now. Here's the thing, God does miracles. God avails you of miracles. But what if your miracle is tied up in an action that he gave you 5 years ago? Let me ask you this. If somebody comes to you and asks you for advice and they don't do it and they come back with for more advice a year from now, are you going to give them new advice, or are you going to ask them, hey, did you do last year's advice? And if they go, well, no, I didn't do last year's advice, are you going to give them more advice that would build on last year's advice, or are you going to go back and do the same thing? I think God does that with us. If you're looking for your miracle, but you haven't done the thing he gave you 5 years ago or a year ago, you're not going to get the next step. I believe that really strongly. I don't know that there's a Bible verse that supports that, but I really believe that very strongly. I believe that if God has a 12-step or a 14-step plan for you and he gives you step one, you're probably never going to get steps 2 or 3 until you've done one. You can go to God, you can cry out all you want, you can offer sacrifices, you can get on your knees, you can pray 4 hours a day. I don't think God is going to give you step two until you've done one. You might think up step two, you might try to, and that's where we go wrong so often. God gives us a vision. Remember when God gave Joseph a vision that your family's going to bow down to you? Right now, we can go on and on about whether or not Joseph should have shared the dream. But the truth of the matter is, if Joseph was looking for that to happen before he went through his trial, Joseph never could have made that happen. And same thing, so I think sometimes God gives us, I'm getting personal here with you. I think sometimes God gives us a vision for something, and then we go try to do the vision on our own. When he wants to give us steps 1, 2, 3, and 4, we go make up step 2 and 3. And I think because of that, a lot of times, and I'm just speaking in the natural for a second. I'll get back in just a second. Lord, help me here. But I really believe that sometimes we make up step 2 and it takes us 5 years to do step 2. But if we waited for God to give it to us, it won't take a day or two. So back into the message. Lord, help me. Back into the message. We have to step into the miracles. The paralytic man had to pick up his mat. The other paralytic man, the palsied man, had to pick up his mat. Paralytic man had to walk. You have to step. I have to step out. And I've given you a story. I haven't given you the details, but I've given you so much story right now about myself. You got to step out. Here's the thing. Are you willing to become the person? What could you accomplish in your life, in your health, in your relationships if you became the person? All right, I don't know if this is part 4 of today's, the intro. We had an intro, and then I gave you the passages, and then I talked about the passages, and then I just gave you my situation. We're going to go so deep right now. And if this is just 5 minutes and it doesn't feel deep, please trust me. What I'm getting ready to give you is the deepest, and it's the most impactful component of everything I'm going to talk with you about today. And I'm going to preach to you just for a moment. I'm not being judgy or condescending, but I'm going to preach. And I'm preaching because this is Rivers of Living Water, because he preached this to me, and now I'm going to preach it to you. Are you afraid to spend 2 hours a day with God? I used to be. Because you know what? Used to be, I would think, wow, I go pray for 5 minutes. And how many of you get tired of praying after 5 minutes? 10 minutes, 15. I used to get really tired of praying after 10, 15 minutes. the last few months, really the last few years, but like the last few months, it is accelerated. And I like to walk. The Lord has been impressing me to just worship him and praise him. And I have discovered that I can worship and praise him for 20 minutes while I'm walking. I can say, Lord, you're so good. You're an awesome God. You're King of Kings. You're Lord of Lords. I worship you. I worship you, God. God, you're a good God. You're an amazing God. Fill me with your spirit. Lord, I love you. I might break into tongues. I might repeat what I just said, but you know what I've discovered? I've discovered that if I'm just worshiping the Lord, I can do that for 20 minutes. And then my mind wanders and I can come back and I can worship for another 20 minutes. Now, I can't beg God for 20 minutes. I get bored. And I can't pray for you for 20 minutes because I'm going to be honest with you. If you ask me to pray for you, I'm going to give you a quick prayer because I'm going to be honest. In the natural, I get tired of praying for 20 minutes for God to heal somebody. All right. Don't judge me. Don't judge me, but I get bored. And so often over the last 20 years, I just haven't prayed enough because I got bored or tired. Maybe that's you. I'm sharing this with you because maybe it's you. But I have discovered that if I'm just praising the Lord, I don't get bored and tired. When the Lord told me the last couple of days is he said, basically, Sean, what if you worship me for 2 hours? What would it take away? You're walking anyway. What would it take away? And I'm like, well, Lord, don't I need to think about my business for an hour? And he's like, well, what good does it do? And I'm like, yeah. A couple of days ago, I had a situation. I have had 3 or 4 situations this week where normally something that I would do would take 3, 4, 5, 6 hours in my business. And I've taken a lot of time away from my business this week, worshiping, praying, dealing with other stuff, God, dealing with the thing that God told me to do. And so some of the stuff that I would take 4 or 5 hours maybe to do, and I'm just throwing that number out there because it depends on the task. I'm just like, God, this thing has to get done. And you know what? I had a couple of situations. I don't remember what the time frame would have been, but I'll tell you, there's one thing I've been dreading doing it. I've just been dreading doing it. It's something I thought it would take me like 2 full days of work. I got into it. And I don't remember if I even gave God an arrow prayer that was like, help me, but I got into doing it. And as soon as I've been dreading doing this for about 6 months in my business, 6 months. And it's just one of those laborious tasks, like a drag, copy, and paste kind of thing. I was like, God, I don't want to do this. I just don't want to do it. And by the way, I want to tell you this. This isn't just my imagination. I hired somebody to do 1/30th of this, 1/30th of this. And based on what they charged me to do it, it took like 5 hours for them to do 1/30th. Now, they don't have the experience I do, but at that rate, the job would have taken 30 times 5 hours. The job would have taken 150 hours. And I was calculating I could do it in 2 days. I sat down. The Lord showed me a different way to do it. And praise be to God, I did the entire project minus, the 80-20 rule. I did the 98.2% rule. About 2% of it, I had to cheat and chop off. I did basically 98% of 2 days of my work, 150 hours of somebody else's work on a linear scale. They'd have probably gotten faster as they kept doing it, but whatever. I did 98% of that in about 30 minutes. Now that's a miracle, but I don't believe that ever would have happened if I hadn't been spending that time with the Lord. And here's what the Lord impressed me. And I was talking to him and I was like, Lord, we have this 8-hour day. And if I spend 2 hours with you, I only have 6 hours left to work. And the Lord impressed on me. He impressed on me, well, what if you could get more done in 6 hours than 8 hours? If you spent the 2 with me, wouldn't it be worth it? And I started thinking about this in the natural. Now I'm going to take a little credit for something right here. Now God gives me all the ability. I give God all the credit, but I'm going to use this word. Actually, I'm not. I've seen situations where I've given folks the rules and regulations for doing something, and I've done it myself. Where if you take an 8-hour day in the natural and constrain yourself to only work for 4 hours, you have to quit after 4 hours. Within a few days, you will be doing all of your 8-hour work in the natural in 4 hours. And if you cut that back again, you can usually get it down to 2 hours. So if you were willing to work for 4 hours and take an 8-hour day and cut it in the natural down to 2 hours, and then you use the extra 2 hours of free time to do something else, you could double your business in 4 hours and have 4 hours of playtime every day. Now that happens in the natural. If that's the case, what more could happen if you did it for spiritual reasons? What if every single day, instead of working for 8 hours, now I realize that some of you don't work or you work in the home, you have 6 children, and so work never goes away. I get that. Maybe you're a farmer and the work has to happen every hour. But I think for most of you, I'm speaking into a situation where, you've got 6, 8 hours worth of work, whether it happens every hour or it's a half an hour a day, all day long or whatever. What would happen if you spent 2 hours a day with the Lord and you just had to get everything done in less time? Is it possible that God would bless that other time so that you were more productive? Now, what about relationships? What about relationships? If you think about in the Bible, there's 3 or 4 sets of relationships. The first relationship is God, right? God created man and had relationship with man. Then God created woman and created relationship for man and woman. Then God told the man and woman to be fruitful and multiply. So there's a relationship with children, right? And then, of course, God created community so that there was relationship and community. Now, I get that it's important that we all make a living so we can feed the children, right? But at the end of the day, what's more important to God? Our relationship with God, our relationship with our wife or spouse, husband, our relationship with our children, and our relationship with each people in the community? Or is it all of our great accomplishments and speaking engagements? And again, I'm not taking anything away from work. Isaac sowed and got 100-fold return. Even Jesus did some carpentry work from what we understand. Paul did tent work. So I'm not taking anything away from work. But if you look at God's priorities, what's most important? Relationship with him, relationship with spouse, relationship with children, and relationship with each other. If all of that is true, what would happen if we spent 2 hours a day with God? We spent 2 hours a day with people, and we took whatever our work time is and we split it in half and just simply found a way, just told God, look, I don't know how it's going to happen, but you got to bless it. What do you think would happen? I'll tell you what I think would happen. I think you'd become twice as productive during half the time. I believe it was Martin Luther that said, the 14, 15, whenever it was, Martin Luther that said, I've got an especially busy day today, so I have to spend 4 hours in prayer. What was he basically saying? He was basically saying, I've got so much to do that I need 4 hours of Christly preparation so that I can actually get it all done. I've heard that David Cho, and I hope I pronounce his name correctly, and I he created with God's help, with God's power, I believe he created the world's largest house church organization in China. 25,000 house churches or 100,000 house churches. I used to study his books. My understanding is, or I heard this somewhere, he spends 4 hours or spend 4 hours a day in the morning, like from 2 to 6 in the morning or something, praying in the spirit. At the time I'm like, what? The crazy thing is, if I spend just 20 minutes praying in the spirit and I come, look, I've been here for an hour and 20 minutes and it feels like time has flown by. I've been reading The Interior Castle by St. Teresa of Avila. Now, I got to warn you, that's deep stuff. And some of it is it is symbolic, and it doesn't, and it's explained. It doesn't line up. It might not line up with your theology. You'll notice one of the things on these calls, I don't teach theology. Like I don't teach the Catholic way or the Protestant way. I don't teach the Presbyterian way. I don't teach I just what's in the word I teach. Okay. So if you go, wow, Sean just blurted out something he's been reading, don't take anything out of it except to say that I have really been digging some gold out of that. And here's the gold. I've been digging a lot of gold, but here's the gold. The gold is that St. Teresa spent hours each day in prayer for years. And after hours of prayer for years, she began to have basically supernatural experiences. I think sometimes we want the supernatural without doing the work. We want results. Martin Luther, with God's help, is credited, and I'm sure it wasn't single-handedly, but he was credited with the Protestant Reformation. But it took him 4 hours of prayer on his busy days. David Cho built what's probably still the biggest house church organization in the country or in the world and may forever be, wrote some of the classic seminal trainings on house churches that are probably, my guess is that they're still required reading for anybody who wants to start a house church. Okay. 4 hours a day in the Spirit. Saint Teresa and many other saints, hours and hours in prayer to be able to get to the place that you can have a supernatural result. If you are looking for a supernatural result, if I'm looking for a supernatural result, yeah, sure. Can God do a miracle one time? Yes. But I believe that if we want daily miracles, if we want to be able to wake up and say, a miracle's going to happen today, we need to be like, and I don't want to put an exact number on it, but we need to be like 4 hours of prayer, bathed in prayer, kind of ready, and not just for a day or two. I just believe that. And I don't want anybody to take that too literally and too religiously. But that's my heart right now. What would happen in your business? And really go back to this. I'm going to go back to the natural for just a split second. 8-hour day, you're work, and you're getting a current result in your business. You're work, and you're getting a current result in your life. What would happen if you spent 2 hours a day with God every single day? Not boring time. Find something you like to do with God. If you like to read his word for a couple hours, maybe that's where you start. If you enjoy praising, and you know what, if you don't know the words, go to the bookstore or even go to online or go to online music. Find some praise and worship stuff and just sing it. Like, what would happen? Look, I don't want to take anything away from the spiritual discussion that we've been having. And I don't think that in the long run this should replace, but if you're struggling to spend 10 minutes a day with God, and you found some worship music you liked, do you think your life would improve if all you did was listen to worship music for 2 hours a day? I think it would. Now, I don't think you'll get as much improvement as if you did some other things, but wouldn't that be a start? Like if you're like, God, I don't know how I can spend 2 hours with you. I take your word out and I get bored. I try to praise you and in 10 minutes I'm bored. Fine. Find some music you like and pray it to the Lord. Like as a first step, not as this is what I'm going to do for the rest of my life. And that's the only place I'm going to grow to. All right. And I hope that was from the Lord. If it wasn't, you can throw that away and go back to praying for 2 hours a day. But here's the thing, in your business, in your life, you're getting this current result. What would happen if you went to God 2 hours a day, every day, 3 hours, 4 hours? What if you spent another 2 hours with people and you just took the last 4 hours of your day and put it into work? What might happen? What if instead of working for 8 hours, you were to spend a couple hours a day speaking to your problem? You spend a couple hours with God, you spend a couple hours with people, and then you go speak to your problem for a couple hours and just work for 2 hours. Here's the thing, you would fill your own mind with good thoughts, okay? God would hear your thoughts. Your enemy would hear your thoughts. Now, would your transformation happen overnight? Probably not. Now, can God do a miracle overnight? Yes, sometimes he does. Probably is your transformation going to happen overnight? No, but maybe. But what if it did? Okay, fine. But let me ask you this. Maybe you've been struggling with something for 20 years. If you leaned in, maybe it didn't happen overnight, Is it possible it would happen faster than the 3 to 5 years we were talking about at the beginning? Is it possible that your transformation might take a month instead of 5 years? What if it took 6 months instead of 5 years? Would it be worth leaning in? So, to wrap things up, are you willing to become the person you want to get the results? Would it be worth it? You have to decide. I don't believe God's going to decide for you. Your wife's not going to decide for you. Your husband's not going to decide for you. Your children aren't going to decide for you. Your church isn't going to decide for you. I believe you have to decide with God. I can't decide. You got to decide with God. But if you'll decide with God and God supports you, and you do all the things I'm trying to like give you like a 1 minute summary here. But if you do all the things we've been talking about today, you lean into the Lord, you spend time with him, you worship him, you seek for it. Maybe you have to study, maybe you have to get, or I meant to talk about this earlier, so I'm not going to spend much time with it. Maybe you've got to get around people that know more than you do. It's just like in business. If you want to grow into a bigger business, you probably need to rub shoulders with people that have a bigger business. If you want to grow in relationship with you want to grow in your marriage, you probably need to rub shoulders with people that have a good marriage. If you want to grow spiritually and learn how to pray in the spirit, you probably need to rub shoulders. It's kind of that people thing. I think you got to spend time with people that have what you want. You can't just get it all out of a book. You can't just think it into existence. You can't get it all on videos. I think you should spend time with people that have what you want. Your business will come around fast. Your wife will come around fast. Your husband will come around fast. Your church will come around. Whatever your problem is, you'll come around fast, and you'll be working 2 to 4 hours a day instead of 8. You will be a real blessing to your wife. You'll be a real blessing to your husband. You'll be a real blessing to your family. You'll be a real blessing to your business. I could go on, but I sense it's time to wrap up. I want to pray. Father, Father, give me voice for 3 more minutes. Father, I thank you for giving. First of all, God, I got to thank you for the transformation that you've placed in me in the last 24 hours. I thank you for what you've been doing the last 2 to 4 months of groundwork. I thank you for my relationship with you for 40 something years. I thank you for the deep relationship that I've had. And I thank you for the continuing relationship I've had for the last 32 years, even though some things have been off. I thank you for all of that. And I thank you for what you've done in me. I thank you for this platform that you've given me. I thank you for the responsibility you've given me. I thank you that you've allowed your spirit to flow through me, rivers of living water and build. So I thank you for all of that. I thank you, God, that I stuck to the message for 90%, 95% of this. I thank you for the message that you placed in me this morning. I thank you that I believe I don't often get to say this, Lord, but I think I stuck to the message and delivered what you had. So I thank you for that. I thank you for these people. I thank you for these people that are absorbing something. They're absorbing something from you. And now I ask that obviously the message that you have for them may not be the same message that you had for me, but I hope and pray that they'll be blessed through the message that you've given me. And Father, I ask that for these people, I want to look them in the eyes while I'm praying. I ask that for these people, that you will use these words, that you will use my pain and my experiences and what I've shared today to become blessing in their lives. And that if they feel like they've missed anything, I know how it is. You listen to something for 90 minutes one time and you take notes. If you listen to it again 2 or 3 times, you will pick up more things. And so, Father, I just ask if they're hearing this and they're thinking, I need to hear it again, Father, I just ask that they'll lean in, that they'll be willing to listen 2 or 3 or 5 times and take notes and go live it out and listen another week from now and say, am I living this out? Because I believe you've placed truth in me. And finally, God, I ask that you will continue this transformation in me. My God, if it's true that in 24 hours you have doubled my relationship with you, I feel bold to ask you to do another doubling in 24 hours. But God, I ask that you will continue to grow me closer to you in a closer walk with you as I spend more time with you, not asking for you to miraculously do a miracle while I lay on the couch and dream, but God, that you will do an active miracle in me as I actively work. And I ask the same thing for these people, that you'll do an active miracle in them as they do the work. We pray in the name of Jesus Christ. Thankfully, pray in the name of Jesus Christ. Thankfully, amen.